I'm Andrew Johnston, and my guest today is local author, writer, academic, and musical artist Matthew Bannister, who has a new album on the way called Go to the Movies. It's been a busy year for you, Matthew. You've had a book out, and I believe this is your second album in this 12-month period.
Almost, yeah. I mean, I did a one-man Bannister project last year which was like poems of Emily Dickinson, which was more a solo project. This is like a band thing, so this is playing with my band, The Changing Same. So it was kind of an album recorded mostly live in the studio at Wintec, and are putting it out and doing a launch next week at Last Place on Saturday the 30th.
Now that track we opened with, now if I've pronounced this wrong, just correct me, Lothlorien?
Lothlorien, yes.
Now you wrote that for the Lord of the Rings movie.
That's correct.
Well, you submitted it for the Lord of the Rings, but
yeah.
As you said in the linear notes to the album, the liner notes, you said obviously it wasn't accepted.
No, well, also you might be hearing it, I suppose, on the soundtrack. Yeah, the theme of the record was kind of, I thought, let's have a theme. So I thought, well, what about films? Because I had a number of songs which were kind of either film-related or had film titles or were related to films, in this case, being a pitch for a film. I mean, that's quite an old track. It would obviously, about 1999. That was about the time that they were, looking around for music. But I mean, you can hear from the music they used in Lord of the Rings that, a rock song of whatever ilk would not really have been suitable because they were going for that kind of, Celtic old worldy vibe.
Well, all that aside, it's a bloody good song. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really got into the spirit of it. And you really did invoke you evoked something of Tolkien.
Well, I've always been a Tolkien fan. When I was a kid, I read all the Tolkien books, like along with all the Narnia books and all that kind of stuff. I was always into fantasy as a kid. So yeah, it came from a real place.
I get an overall impression listening to the album. There's 10 songs altogether, and going through it, there's that movie theme, but there's also two other overriding themes. Now, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the idea, I get the feeling that you're thinking, you're getting on now. You're not a young man anymore. You're thinking about, how much more time have I got left? How much more creative time have I got left? And that aside, I also, you talk an awful lot about love, the sustaining, nourishing love that you develop as you get older and wiser, rather than the
young love,
which is a very, very different thing. So talk about that if you could, please, Matthew.
Which songs are you thinking of? Yeah, there is a song. I guess "Sure to Rise" is a love song. Yeah, I wrote that for my partner. Some years ago, actually, and then I just sort of dug it up on a tape. During COVID lockdown, I needed something to do, and so I had all this big box of old cassette tapes, and so I digitized them. They were all old four tracks, and I digitized them and worked them out how to transfer them onto the computer. And I found all these old songs I'd written like 20 years ago, and that was one of them, this song for my wife. So I thought, well, I'll revive it.
Well, it's
called Sure to Rise.
Let's have a listen to that, and we'll come back and talk about it.
Well, I just wanted to say to my American friend, you have turned my life around, dodged an unfortunate end. I wanna tell you the news, all you sweet talking guys. You don't know what you're missing, she'll take you by surprise. You're making a big mistake if you underestimate that look in her eyes. And if you bake her a cake, you'd better try and make it sure to rise. You're my favorite CD, you're a bottle of wine. Let's get together tonight. time. I wanna say that you're great, but that's not nearly enough. And I wanna let it out, all that emotional stuff. You're making a big mistake if you underestimate that look in her eyes. And if you bake her a cake, you better try and make it sure to rise. You're making a big mistake if you underestimate that look in her eyes. And if you bake her a cake, you better try and make it sure to rise.
I really enjoyed that song, Matthew. It's not only catchy, it's deep, meaningful.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a joke, I suppose, in the sense that Sure to Rise is obviously a kind of old Kiwi kind of, Kiwiana kind of slogan as well from Edmund's Baking Powder. And could be seen as a metaphor for other kinds of, activity, I guess. But yeah, it was just, having written many negative songs in my life, I felt it was probably time to try and write some positive ones about my loved ones. So rather than criticizing my family, I should actually say something, nice about them. And so I did.
How long have you been married for now?
We've been married since 94, so that's almost 30 years.
And you've been together a little bit longer than that?
Since 89, so 35 years.
That's a long time to sustain a relationship.
It is. We've been through thick and thin. But yeah, we're still together. And we have two boys who've both grown up to be musicians of various kinds. And they're doing well for themselves. So we're happy with that.
There is another song, I can't think of it at the moment, but you talk about your boy. Is that another family song?
Oh, is that, you're talking about Too Far Gone?
I think so.
I sing, you're my son, my only one.
That's
yes,
the
you
one.
make daytime bright.
Yes.
Yeah, it could be about sun. I mean, it's also a song about death as well, because it has that line, pray that when it happens, I'll be too far gone to care, which is a kind of like, well, I hope you die before I do, because I don't want to be around after you're gone. So yeah, that's a kind of has a mortality kind of theme. But that's not, that line isn't really directed to a son, it's more directed to a partner. So I guess it's a song that mixes in references to different family members.
Well,
And of course, you're my son could also just mean, you're my light. So it could be read both ways. I think there's a certain amount of mortality on the record, yeah, for sure. And there are songs that are about relationships, and also there are songs about films in which sometimes sad and tragic things happen. So, Remains of the Day is a song based on that sort of film, which is also a book by Kazuo Ishiguro, and it's about a man who sort of feels impelled to perform his duty even when his masters seem to be kind of going around the bend. So it's sort of like sticking to your task in an intolerable situation, which for some reason has become an idea that increasingly appeals to me as a subject for writing songs. Sort of sticking to your guns, and even though you realize that the situation that you're in is kind of sort of the people around you are not to be trusted, but nevertheless you have to kind of stay with what you're doing and sustain, keep going.
Actually, on the subject of Ishiguro, again, I was listening to that song. I've just been going through his books one by one, and the latest one I read is Clara and the Sun, which is probably the most profound book about artificial intelligence I've yet read, and I've read a lot because it's a favourite subject of mine. He's a marvellous author. I've seen the film Remains of the Day, but I haven't yet read the book. It's the last one on the list.
Well, I think all those books have a kind of similar theme in that the main characters in them are in some way not regarded as fully human, but nevertheless they have a perspective on supposed human life, which is different to the average human. They've all been marginalised in some way, either because they're robots or because they're not, or because they're clones, or because they're members of the underclass. And as a result, they have this kind of unique perspective on the human sort of tragedy unfolding around them. They're both sort of involved but not involved.
Remains of the day, autumn vacation, lifetime of serving, good of the nation. Always remember your humble position, never to question when orders are given. Outside these walls, things may be different. Everyday people making decisions. One man, one vote, a chain reaction. Falling in love, following fashion. It's all in the past. Question of honor. Man and his word. Trusted no longer. In an inconstant world. Who's keeping order? Barbarian hordes. A mass at the border. The order of nature. We keep iterating. Because the world is degenerating. It's all in the past. Question of honor. Man and his word. Trusted no longer. All in the past. Question of honor. Man and his word. Trusted no longer.
Matthew, I'm going through the album and the song comes on, and I thought, oh bugger, my device has skipped to another album altogether. I think it's skipped to a compilation album of Southern US rock tracks, and then I rush over to the computer to have a look, and no, it's still on your album. It's called Howl the Daylight Down, which really stands out from the album because it's so completely different to anything else. The album is very much. Well, I don't mean this in a negative way. It harks back to the 1980s. It harks back to the Dunedin sound, which you were so instrumental. You played an instrumental part in creating. It's jangly 80s.
Yeah, it's sort of indie pop rock, basically.
Indie pop
That's
rock.
my style.
But it's also been filtered through your psyche over the last 40 years, and it's come out. You're an older and wiser person. It's a different kind of sound, but all of a sudden, this song called "Howl the Daylight Down" jumps out of the speakers, and it's completely different to the rest of the album.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I never wanted to be in a band where it was just me writing the songs, so I kind of encouraged the other guys to have a go. And Bruce, the drummer who wrote that song, he's actually a really well-known songwriter and musician around Hamilton. In fact, I believe he actually won a Golden Guitar Award once for a song that he wrote about 20 years ago. So he's actually quite well known in the sort of country, kind of rootsy, sort of bluesy sort of scenes. But as you say, his style is quite different to mine. But I thought, as I said, I wanted a more than one voice on the record. In Sneaky Feelings, I always thought the great strength of the band was that we had a range of songwriters, different voices. So there's a Bruce song on the album, and there's also a song by John on the album too.
Which song did John write?
He wrote "Stay on Top," which is the sort of funky one.
That's the one we're going to listen to next, actually, because I didn't actually realise that. I thought that you'd written it, because I do know that as a music listener, you have a fondness for call and response styles and the songs that you like to listen to, and this is a very much a funky call and response kind of song.
Yeah, well, I kind of added the call and response stuff in. I kind of did a bit of work on his song to sort of add, backing vocals and sort of little effects and things to make it more dynamic. So, yeah, that's my contribution.
But getting back to Hell the Daylight Down, that's a hell of a song, and the vocal delivery is really, really good.
Oh, yeah, Bruce is like an amazing singer. I mean, he's got such a powerful voice, and he's a great drummer too. So, yeah, you should all come along and see him next Saturday.
Now, we'll play Stay on Top, and we'll be back in just a moment.
My brother rang
One of the striking features about this album, Matthew, is it's just full of really, really good ideas. There's lots of interesting arrangemental things going on there that really catch your attention. There's lots of nice instrumentation, but there's also lots of little effects things that you do in the studio, just little touches here and there that really help to propel the album along.
Yeah, it was all done basically live in a couple of days, except for some of the overdubbing. So we did the live tracks, at Wintec, as live backing tracks in one day, and then we did the vocals in one day. And then, as I usually do, I took away the multi-tracks and messed around with them at home on my computer and just added a bit of extra spice to them. Not too much, because, I thought the basic tracks were pretty good. So it's not a huge overdub job, but, I just tried to sort of fill out the sound in a couple of places.
Now, before we move on to our next song, let's talk about your book.
Oh, sure.
Give us the rundown on that.
The Front Lawn book?
Yes, your latest book. Because you've written a few, three books now?
4, actually.
4?
Yeah. So this is just a book in the 33 and the Third series. It's about the Front Lawn's album, Songs from the Front Lawn.
Now, who are the Front Lawn?
So the Front Lawn were Don McGlashan and Harry Sinclair, and they were kind of like a music come comedy come entertainment duo that were working in New Zealand in the early 80s, in the same kind of tradition as the Top Twins and later the Flight of the Conchords, kind of a sort of duo that could could perform a variety of ways. They made one record. Actually, they made 2 records, but the record they're best known from is the first one, Songs from the Front Lawn, which, collected songs from their stage show. It was, I think a well-loved album amongst New Zealanders of a certain age. It came out in 1989, and it was sort of unusual because, unlike most New Zealand albums of that time, it was much more New Zealand-y. It had a lot of sort of use of kind of New Zealand colloquialisms and place names, and it kind of anticipates the work that Don was to do in the Mutton Birds of Dominion Road and stuff like that. But at the same time, I had a kind of quirky sense of humour that perhaps the Mutton Birds didn't have.
How you doing? Haven't seen you for a while.
Where are you living anyway?
But it's a pretty standard conversation between 2 Kiwi blokes at the time.
Yeah, how you doing is like that's the closest you get to their kind of their stage act as opposed to their singing bits. I mean, a show was like a collection of songs, skits, etc. And how you doing? Well, that was like a particular skit that they did, which plays on kind of New Zealand sort of tropes of male interaction.
We don't actually say anything about our feelings, but we just kind of intimate them.
That's right. There is a moment in this monologue when one of the guys sort of breaks down or threatens to break down, because the first guy says, "Oh, so where are you living anyway?" And the second guy goes, "Oh, you can hardly call it living. I'm having quite a lot of emotional problems." And the other guy just goes, "Palmerston North, Hamilton."
Is that the album that song Andy's off?
Yeah, Andy's on that record.
Yes, because that was I wouldn't say it was a hit song at the time, but it's one of those songs. This is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, actually, is artists have these particular songs that aren't necessarily hits at the time, but they never disappear, and they actually grow. They grow in stature, and Andy's
That's certainly one of them.
It is one of them. That's about his brother, isn't it? Don McGlashan's brother, if I remember correctly.
I do believe, yes, that his brother, he did have a brother who died in a boating accident, and so yes, the song is partly about that. But it's also about Takapuna Beach and reflecting on the sort of corporatization of Auckland in the 80s and Rogernomics and the kind of impact that was having on the city and the sort of memories of the narrators being destroyed by kind of new developments and stuff like that, which became a metaphor for loss, I guess. But it was also a personal loss because of loss of a family member.
How's the book been going for you?
Well, I think it's been going pretty well. I mean, I did 3 launches. I sort of, thought I've got to do a bit of work to promote this thing. So I did launches in Auckland, Wellington, and Hamilton. And then I also did quite a lot of publicity. And then Don is touring New Zealand at the moment, and he kindly agreed to add the book to his merch stand. And I believe it's selling reasonably briskly through that. So all the indications I'm getting is that it's doing quite well.
Tell us about the 33 and the series itself.
Well, it's just a series that's based on famous albums, and it's been running for about 20 or 30 years. And they've done a lot of famous albums from Europe and America, etc. But now recently they started off an Australasian imprint, and so now they're asking for proposals for albums from Australasia, basically. So there's a bunch of ones about Australian albums coming out, and there's a bunch of ones about New Zealand albums on the way out.
So that's how you got the gig, isn't it? You put in a proposal.
Yeah, it was advertised, somewhere on some mailing list that I'm on, and I just said, well, I think the front lawn would probably be a good choice. So I just filled out I put a proposal in, and then people said, yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
You're going to do another one?
Well, I would like to do another one, but I've got to say that nothing presents itself as straightforward a project as the front lawn for various reasons. Partly, I think, because I knew Don and Harry quite well, and I felt that they would probably be keen. When I've put out feelers about other possibilities, sometimes I've encountered, situations where it's like, well, the lead singer hates the guitarist, and so and that's immediately a problem because anything you write, the other person's going to say, nah, it's not the way it was. So you really need people that are sort of on your side from the beginning, I think, or else you're going to be pushing shit uphill, basically. The other thing about the front lawn that made it easy was, of course, that they didn't only just do music. They also did film, they did theatre, and also they're a couple of extremely literate, intelligent guys. And, much as I love my rock star compatriots, they're not all as articulate as Don and Harry. So they wouldn't always necessarily have as many interesting things to say. So, so at the moment, yeah, I wouldn't mind, but I'm not seeing an obvious candidate yet.
We're going to have a listen to Woody, and when we come back, we'll talk about this song, and I'll also like to talk about your previous one-man Bannister album.
Hey Woody, I wrote you a song, thought that we could get along. Both of us play mostly the same parts. Annie Hall and Danny Rose played against Mia Farrow, controlling lovers through your art. Love and death, I've seen it all. At 17 in student halls, you told the camera where to look. You knew the lines, you wrote the book. An answer for every situation, a quick riposte for all occasions. Thought if I could make her laugh, then I took a photograph. I created something that would endure. But my fingers always trembling, no automatic happy ending, and the leading ladies getting fewer. Take the stick, give it a lick. Would you trust Woody with your kids? No one tells him what to do. His wife tried it, she got sued. He's a wolf in sheep's clothing, and his camera eye is roving. Hey Woody, I wrote you a song, thought that we could get along. Both of us play mostly the same parts. I wanted to be like you, a neurotic New York Jew. Now I know I'll never be that smart. Be like Zelig, unseen, turning up in every scene. No one knows how he got there. Suddenly he disappears. He's just like a chameleon who really knows what he's feeling.
Matthew, Woody, that's obviously about Woody Allen because you make references to his films, especially Zelig, isn't it? And
lots of his films are in there.
Yeah, let's talk about Woody Allen and his influence on you.
Well, I think I was just acknowledging that when I was like 17 or 18, and a sort of insecure university student at Otago, They would show a lot of Woody Allen movies, sort of like for free or for like $1 in the student cafe. And, I guess I got right into Woody Allen, and he became a kind of sort of almost a weird kind of mentor to me, in the sense of I sort of, internalized some of the things that he said and did in his films, and, wondered if they could work for me, and sort of also fantasized on some level about being a sort of smart, cocky New York Jew like him. So it was like kind of an imaginary existence for myself. And also he was just a model of an artist who was like me, kind of insecure and neurotic, and always kind of worrying about his reputation with the opposite sex, etc., and often failing and getting knocked back, but never giving up. So and so I found him in many ways a very sympathetic character, although obviously he may have done some unsympathetic things in his time.
I find it very interesting that you aspire to be like him, but then you come to the conclusion that you're just not on his level at all, which I thought, well, that's very honest, because I think many people who know you would think that you're actually on quite a very high functioning creative level, and you're quite prolific.
And so is Woody. He's never stopped creating either. I mean, some people might say he should stop, but he's still going.
And by all accounts, his new film's pretty good as well. But this idea of the artist and the artist's misdemeanors, most of us have got things in our past that we're not thrilled about.
Yeah.
Things we did when we were a different person, when we were younger, and think, gosh, I wish I hadn't have done that. But you also learn from the situation. I'm not convinced that Woody Allen is as bad as some people would paint him out to be.
Well, he's been accused of various things, but I mean, just from a purely legal angle, nothing's ever been proved. Nothing's ever gone to court, and so therefore, although he has done some morally dubious things, no doubt about that.
And he's hurt people who are very close to him. He's hurt them grievously.
That's right. And I've probably hurt some people grievously too in my life. So I think we all have to acknowledge that we've all hurt somebody from some time, rather pointing the finger at others, accept some of the blame ourselves. So yeah, he's a flawed human being, and so am I. So it's also an identification about somebody who is kind of not perfect. But nevertheless, through their art, they provide, a kind of sort of a role model in some ways, which may or may not be functional, but nevertheless, it's something I wanted to acknowledge, and that sort of fitted in, I guess, with the theme of the record too. I mean, he probably means more to me in some ways than most other film directors, just because I felt a kind of personal connection with him, for better or worse, or for richer or for poorer.
One of my favourite music genres is the art song. It's something I love very much, and very simply, an art song is basically a composer has put some music to a poem, basically. Leader song is another word for them.
Yeah.
But art song is actually quite a broad genre, and the other day I was listening to this Finnish composer, and I was thinking, he's very prolific. I think he wrote 900 art songs, and I was thinking to myself, gosh, this guy's pretty good. Then I looked him up. Nazi.
Oh, really?
Paedophile.
Oh, Jesus.
Prolific paedophile. All-round nasty piece of work. But beloved by Finns.
Okay.
Who have had this argument and come to an agreement amongst themselves. Yes, he was a bad person, but his music transcends his badness. Yeah.
Well, I think we have to acknowledge, and it's part of the complexity of life, that sometimes good people or bad people do good things, and artists are especially common to some degree. Quite often that happens. And of course, in the case of, I suppose, rock musicians, you have to remember there was a time when the whole idea of being a rock musician was you were supposed to do bad stuff. You were supposed to break the laws of society. You were supposed to transgress. You were supposed to do crazy shit. So it seems a little bit weird now when people will turn and say, oh, look at that bad stuff they did. When at the time everyone was basically goading on saying, yeah, go on, do that. So I guess, the times have changed and morality has changed. But certainly in the 60s, a lot of the morality was about smashing existing morality. And of course that meant that sometimes people did things that people look down upon today. But they were just experimenting with the rules and the boundaries of their culture to some degree. And obviously, people got hurt. But it was also part of the zeitgeist.
Now, I brought up the concept of art songs because your last one-man Bannister album, well, in my mind, is a collection of art songs.
Yeah, well, Emily Dickinson was a poet whose poems I sort of memorized over a couple of years as a kind of exercise and meditation. And then I started thinking, because I'm a person who finds it easier to write music than to write lyrics, and so I was having a few problems with lyrics. So I thought, well, why not just use some of these poems? You know, our poems, as you know, have a very kind of sort of strong song-like rhythm to them. So it was pretty easy, really, to come up with some music that would suit them. I mean, the only difficulty I had was that because all the songs have a similar kind of poems have a similar kind of rhythm, I had to kind of figure out ways to sort of mess around with the music so that each song didn't come out sounding like the last one. But I think I figured that I got around that okay. So I set like about 14 of her songs to music. I'm not the first person to do it, I might add. Other people have done it as well. But it was a reasonably successful sort of project, I think. I suppose I felt some kind of identification with Emily Dickinson, just like I felt with Woody Allen on some level. Especially, I suppose, kind of her solitary life and her attempt to kind of turn her life into a kind of work of art, living work of art. And I suppose during COVID, that isolation thing felt particularly relevant because, you know, legendarily she sort of retired to her room for periods of months at a time and only came out, you know, very occasionally. And I felt a bit like that myself, locked down during COVID. So it was a way of using art to communicate with the world, I guess.
That's an interesting idea, living your life as a living work of art. Is that what you feel about yourself?
Well, I'm aspiring to it, but I'm not sure I'm actually doing it. I mean, if I was really doing it, then I suppose I would think about how I dressed and how I behaved rather than just thinking about music and perhaps writing. But, you know, I guess it's a way of sort of constructing a kind of ethos to live by, I suppose. I mean, obviously, some people have done it much more completely than I could ever do it. Someone like Oscar Wilde or, you know, maybe like that. But, you know, it's an ideal that you can aspire towards.
Now, I've got a couple of questions for you. First of all, you're an academic. You work at Wintec. Tell us about...
Te Pukinga.
Te Pukinga, sorry. Tell us about the life of an academic.
Well, for me, it's been interesting. Since lockdown, I found that I've been able to work at home a lot more and do a lot more research, which has been good. I've been able to do quite a lot of writing and, you know, like the book that are on the front lawn, but I've also written a number of essays, mostly about aspects of music. Although occasionally I also write about kind of New Zealand sort of culture and popular culture as well, as in the thing I wrote about Taika Waititi. And, you know, getting published, and so that's all good. And trying to get access to research resources, which is kind of a little bit more difficult because Wintec, well, their library could be better, put it that way. So us academics at researchers have to find all these nefarious ways of getting access to databases, which really, if you were at a university, you get them automatically. But for us, it's kind of an ongoing struggle year after year. You know, how am I going to find, you know, the databases this year? I'm going to have to get some money from research. You know, I have to, you know, lean on a friend, that kind of stuff. So sometimes it's quite hard to do your research, but we always find a way.
So what do you teach?
Well, I teach basically media and cultural theory. So my job is postgraduate theory supervisor, which means that basically students who are doing various kinds of art or media projects, whether it be making an album or a film or even, you know, a bunch of paintings, they do that at honours level or a master's level, but they also have to be able to reflect on what they've done and be able to write about it in some kind of, you know, coherent sort of a way. Like, you know, how does my work relate to other work in the field, or how does it address a particular theme or idea that might be prevalent in that field at that time? So they need to understand a bit of theory, they need to have done a bit of research, and I help them write that essay. And then at undergrad level, I also teach sort of cultural theory, just some basic stuff for like undergrad students about how to think about their work and how to think about the media environment that they're operating in. In the last few years, we've brought in a new paper which very much looks at basically the internet and how it's changing the way that people interact and communicate, and it's changing the meaning of what it is to be an artist or to be creative. And it's changing how people, communicate with each other. And so I'm just trying to encourage them to think about the media that they use every day in a slightly more sort of nuanced sort of a way.
Do you find the work satisfying?
Yeah, I find it satisfying in the sense that, especially at postgrad level, often students are quite engaged. Sometimes at undergrad level, it's a bit of a struggle because they are politics students and they're kind of often quite practically minded, and so they're a bit like, oh, why do we have to do this theory stuff, So there's a bit of an uphill battle there, but it's one I'm sort of used to kind of fighting. But also, I get some feedback sometimes about work I've done from other academics around the world. People in Denmark will take a paper that I've done and include it in their course outline, etc. So it's like a global kind of network of kind of scholars, and so if you can tap into that and get a bit of feedback from that from time to time, it just sort of reminds you there's a larger world out there.
Okay, we're going to finish off with, you're going to play a song live in the studio, Living in a Bubble. But before we do that, Matthew, I want to address something that you said a little bit earlier on about you have a lot of trouble writing lyrics. You prefer to write music. One of the things I want to say about this album is that I think the lyrics are superb. I thoroughly enjoyed, like a lot of people, I listened to the melody first and the words are a secondary thing. But with your songs, was the words that came to the forefront. That's what I was listening to. I wasn't actually listening to the melody per se. And all in all, it's a really, really terrific album, listeners. And I'd give it a good solid 9 out of 10. I was really surprised at how good it was. Well done, Matthew.
Cheers, thank you, man.
And you're going to perform for us a song called Living in a Bubble.
Which incidentally was written well before COVID, so it's not directly about that particular situation, but became sort of relevant. Used to living in a bubble, never having any trouble. Everything was under my command. Bursting through into my underworld, suddenly there is a wonder girl. Things occur that I don't understand. Used to living in a bubble, never having any trouble. Now I think I'm seeing double. Why should it be so surprising? Always there on the horizon. Guess that I was just too blind to see. I close my eyes and there I think I'll find security, some kind of peace of mind by ignoring what's in front of me. It's 3:30 in the morning, finally the truth is dawning. Living in a bubble's roaring.
Thank you, Matthew Bannister.
We came to a decision. Things were getting out of hand. It's not ideal conditions. We hope you'll understand. We had the best intentions. Your interests at heart. It's better You get a brand new start. The sins of our omission are endlessly rerun. In 2020 vision happened when you were quite young. We had the best intentions. Your interests at heart. It's better not to mention. You get a brand new start. It's not the things you do, dear. It's what you leave undone that leave you with a heartache, that make you cut and run, that take the word unspoken, the song you did not write, the letter left unopened. They'll be in your dreams too.